Hi, folks. We're Tasteless today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the astonishing, incredible, breathtaking levels of duplicity and the 100% lack of self-awareness that the various countries that are going to have to take back their citizens who have illegally entered the United States, many of whom have committed further crimes, on top of the crime of illegally entering the United States. And so we're looking at countries, Mexico could be looking at 20 plus million people coming back into Mexico, Mexican citizens. Colombia, Venezuela, El Salvador, I mean, the list goes on of places that are going to have to take back fairly large numbers. It's not simply a case of large numbers. Like Colombia, the numbers aren't that big, but we're talking about the type of people that have gone to the United States and the governments, third world governments, have been keen to get rid of. So if you know that the United States has got open border, for example, has got effectively open borders, then globalists, well-connected NGO, globalist agitator places say, hey, look, why don't you send your people off to America? Your surplus population. Why don't you send that off to the United States? No one's going to stop them. And we'll even help your citizens go from Colombia or Venezuela or wherever. We'll even help them get into the United States. We'll give them clothing, food, transport, medical care. We'll look after the whole thing. Because the last thing you want, if you're the Colombian president, is how many millions of people are dying on the road on their way to go to somewhere else. Because then the focus comes back onto your country and your government. And, whereas if all these NGOs and so on are all helping your citizens go into the United States and they arrive there in one piece, then any optics that are negative is America's problem, not yours. So, hey, that sounds all right. I'll go along with that. So now, if you're a government administrator, you look at the gangs, the drug gangs and the street shootings, the prisons and the mental asylums, whatever. You look at all of that and say, hey, why don't we clean out all that? Why don't we take all the people from there and just send them off to America? And we can just put them on a caravan. The NGOs will take care of them and feed them and clothe them and, look after them and everything and convey them to America. So suddenly, the minute that we just make this decision, it's not our problem anymore. We're not going to save a lot of money. We're going to get rid of a lot of bad people and the Americans can sort it out. They're a richer country. They got more police and they got more courts and prisons than us. So we'll just transfer our problem that's been created through our own piss poor administration and basket case mismanagement of our economy, and we'll just send it off to a better managed economy, and it can become their problem and not ours. So there's a huge temptation to just send all your criminals off to the West. It's a huge temptation to do this. Now, even where you don't have a criminal sector or a large number of criminals in prison, and lower level sort of peasant crimes aren't really prosecuted in these places. And in places like Eastern Europe, for example, they still have a hangover from the old communist days where ideological crimes were heavily punished, but actual crimes weren't punished or were punished much more lightly. So if you're a pickpocket or a hustler or someone who would push people down a quiet alleyway and then steal their money and that sort of thing, those sort of people weren't really prosecuted, or not to any sustained degree. But if you said the wrong thing politically, you could get a long prison term. Now, it's a similar way it plays out in third world countries. It's not ideological per se, but it's the resources required to chase down, as in police resources, government resources, required to chase down petty thieves and the vagrants that'll take a couple of dollars out of your pocket or something, that sort of thing. There's no real sort of commitment to doing that. It's sort of not a problem the government even wants to have to think about. But if the government starts to intervene and enforce the law and pickpocketing, all that, then the government also then has to provide the soup kitchens and the bread lines and all the other sort of things that they don't want to do, because that's additional cost. So if they sort of pretend these problems don't exist, then they don't have to do anything about it, which is part of the wider mismanagement, like the horrendous levels of corruption in India. Everyone pretends it's not happening, and the people that are, the Brahmins, the demigods at the apex of Indian society, they're outraged when you say that India is a corrupt society, and they'll even be outraged at that while they're giving someone a bribe. They've got a very strange sort of view that if we do it, it's okay. Now, so when the United States has, any Western country has open, or what's effectively open borders, or where they're not vetting who comes in, then this is an open invitation for these sort of governments to say, hey, why don't we do a clampdown on the pickpockets? What we'll do is there'll be a special little refugee camp that's set up by these NGOs. We'll shift all the pickpockets into there. The NGOs can then radicalize them and then say, hey, we'll take you to America and you can go to America. I go to America. So it's all part of a wider sort of sustained interlocking, and I would argue quite treacherous attempt to move problems of the third world into the first world. And in so doing, they subdivide the wealth of working people in the West. So over the last 30 odd years, and even going back longer than that, well, since this mass migration stuff really kicked off, which is in Australia's case, 28 to 30 years, I guess, around that. Since that mass migration thing kicked off, Australians' purchasing power of the paycheck, the average wage paycheck, has declined by 2/3. That's how much more expensive it is. Whereas senior executive jobs, that were, say, they were getting paid 4 or 5 times, 6 times the average wage. Senior executive jobs are now getting paid 150 or 200 times the average wage. So the wages of the elite class have just gone to the moon, whereas the purchasing power wages of the worker have gone, hit ground level almost. So again, declined by 2/3. So all that mass migration has achieved, and the knock-on consequences of it, is to subdivide again the wealth of Western workers. And the principal instrument through which that's been achieved, of course, has been mass migration. So all these people, anyway, these countries like the Colombias and the Venezuelas and wherever, they export their people problems to the first world, in this instance, the United States, or South America, but other African countries too. They export their people problems to the first world. And now that President Trump is in office, so, well, hey, all you illegals, you got to go back where you came from. Go back home. And it's interesting listening to the politicians and the talking mouthpieces and the legacy media, the globalist controlled media that runs interference and protection for all the mass migration. These talking heads come along. There's plenty of YouTube videos on this where they say, look, we can't take back our citizens. I mean, it's their own citizens. They're not taking some citizens somewhere else. Like, we can't take back our own citizens. It's unsustainable. It can't be sustained. We can't do it. It's going to swamp us. So why was it okay to send all these people to the United States? Well, let's not talk about that. The duplicity, I mean, fuck. So now Mexico is going to, again, over 20 million people coming back to Mexico. Now, why can't we take them back is the argument. Well, we don't have enough jobs or this or that. So there's all that sort of stuff. Well, get to it. How it's your problem to solve. Work at solving it. Other countries will help you in solving it, but you'll solve it in Mexico, not by exporting your surplus population to the West, where they're not needed anyway, and all they do is depress wages and lower living standards. That's not what the white people sort of signed on for or voted for or agreed to. So now, why can't they take them back? So the answer, well, some of them, they don't speak Spanish anymore. I'd say there'd be very few in that category. Most of the illegals that, excuse me, that have lived in the United States for 20 years, barely speak a word of English. The ones that are born in the United States, the children of the illegals, they all speak Spanish. Certainly the ones that any ones I'm aware of, and they speak accented English because they speak Spanish so much. And they have to speak Spanish. Their parents can't speak a word of English, so they have to speak Spanish. They're going to talk to their parents and the other family members that have arrived illegally. So the first thing, well, they aren't going to fit into Mexican society, because they're not, they can't really speak the language, and their customs and habits, they're not familiar with them because they've been in America too long. Well, the reverse would be true too. The Mexican peasants that don't speak a word of English going to America, then they're unsustainable there, going that way. Why are they only unsustainable coming back to Mexico? So all the arguments that are against mass migration into the United States from South America, all those arguments, they're now trotting out and say, oh, no, we can't do it. It's unsustainable and this and that, the next thing. So they seem to have zero self-awareness. And again, they're making an argument for why mass migration into the West is unsustainable as well for the same reasons. Illiterate peasants that don't speak a word, have no skills, have no education, have no work experience. Why would you want them in any country, let alone the West? But then on top of that, the prisons and the mental asylums and the lunatic asylums, all that sort of stuff, all these governments are clearing out, as they did in Cuba, clearing out all those sort of institutions and just shipping their problems off to the West. And and somehow that's okay, that's fine. Now you see this with the college kids also from illegals. They just shrug their, well, no human being's illegal. They shrug their shoulders and go, oh, well, look, there's the space here. You've got the land to do it, and and why not? And what's the go? Oh, well, look, there's the space here. You've got the land to do it, and and why not? And what's the problem? And we're working hard and paying taxes. I mean, that's not true whether they're working hard, and I dispute that strongly. In terms of paying taxes, most of them are on low wages where they're actually receiving more benefits than tax they pay. This idea that they're working hard and paying taxes is bullshit. All they're doing is lowering wages and lowering standards, or that's all they're achieving. They're not achieving anything else. Now, will there be the odd one or two that gets up and does well? Well, sure. And just on a balance of odds, the 1 in a million, are they going to do okay? Yeah. So you have to import 1 million people who are parasites and drain your economy just to get one that might do all right. No, those are crazy bad odds. So it's an interesting sort of thing. Now just adding to this, and I saw a video from a YouTuber called VEE, and I think he's Romanian or Bulgarian, and he was talking about when Romania joined the EU, that suddenly all the petty criminals off the street just suddenly all disappeared and went to the West, went to Britain or France or wherever, because there were better pickings there. If you're begging and stealing, you can make more money doing it in a rich country than you can in a poor country. So all the criminal elements, so as at that street level of crime, all the criminals suddenly disappeared, and I think he's from Romania, and Romania suddenly became a safe place and a place where there was no crime because all the criminals left, because you could move within the EU without any vetting procedures. Now, why the EU would sign up Romania into the EU is quite beyond me. It's like a baffling act of self-destruction in my view. But anyway, there you go. Now, if they work to develop the Romanian economy so that they were somewhat comparable to the West, then I would understand that at that time it maybe would work. But at the time, Romania was dirt poor compared to Germany and France. So why you would bring them into the EU unless it was for masses of cheap labour? And that didn't really work out either. All it was bunches of parasites moving around. So now I heard the same from someone from Poland that said the same thing. There was a lot of that petty street crime around in Poland, not as much as there was in Romania from the looks of it, but there was a lot of petty street crime in Poland. And as soon as Poland got in the EU, all these people just disappeared. The gangsters, the petty thieves, they all just went rushing into England and those sort of places. And then they did their illegal stuff. Albania, the same. All the criminals moved to the west. Now, when you come from a very low trust society like in Albania or Romania, and you go to a very high, or relatively at least a very high trust society like Britain, then you think everyone's naive and just easy. Gee, these people can so easily be exploited, and you don't. These people from the lower end of the scale, the low trust countries, they don't understand social trust and how it's developed and why it's of benefit and how it creates wealth. Even in its high trust society will have much more wealth than a low trust society. As night follows day, that paradigm plays out. But to them, they see that a high trust society is just full of naive people that can be exploited and stolen from. They don't comprehend the wider issue of high trust to low trust. And again, low trust societies have a view that the only way you can get money is by stealing it from someone else. And so when they come to the West, their job, as they see it, is, well, I can make money just by stealing from these guys. So they're stealing from these naive, gullible people, and that's the view that they have, which is another reason why Western society is declining, because what used to be a high trust society, certainly when I was a kid, growing up, has now become, in Australia even, a much lower trust society, much lower. The amount of social trust in the country is demonstrably lower than it once was, and that makes wealth creation much harder than it once was. The ability of people to get together with shared values and shared objectives, shared goals, to collaborate to create wealth is what creates Western wealth. You take that away, and it is being taken away by mass migration and those sorts of things. You take that away, and then the ability to collaborate to create wealth similarly diminishes. Now, in terms of people going back to the repatriation, there are screams and cries, we can't do it, it's too hard, it's unsustainable, and so on. I hope none of that alters the course of President Trump. They need to send all these people back, and any pain that as a consequence will lead to changes in those countries, and they will have to improve their levels of democratic representation and reduce their corruption, and all they'll have to make changes in their countries, which will, the knock-on effect of which I would hope will be a good thing, and that will create changes in themselves that will be beneficial to all concerned. Similarly, it'll make them think twice again in the future, where they think the easy option isn't to improve their own country, but simply to export their surplus population, and that'll fix things, which it invariably doesn't. It just leaves the levels of corruption and so on in place and doesn't address them or have anything to do with them. Similarly, the government of Mexico has actively, aggressively aided and abetted the mass people movement into the United States. They could easily have stopped it at the southern Mexican border or even at the US border. They could easily have stopped it, but they didn't. And again, they aggressively aided and abetted. And now they're crying poor that their citizens will be coming back en masse. That is duplicity and at its most extreme. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.